Let's have a look then to the review of the previous work package. Yesterday there were three main topics that we went through: output management, PPDS configuration, and convert architecture. And these were the three activities that we also asked you to execute. So the first one was new output management. As we have said yesterday, the BRF plus output parameter determination is activated by default when you do a conversion to S4HANA. So that gets the default option to manage output. And after that, obviously, there is a specific configuration that needs to be done in order to define the parameter, enable the communication, for example, with the Adobe document services for the PDF templates, and obviously all the parameters that are required in order to determine which outputs should be selected for which type of document, depending on the type, depending on the receiver, and determining then channel and the form template. So that are the activities for yesterday that you had to execute. We haven't seen so much issues or errors reported in this specific task, so we hope everything was okay and quite straightforward. The second thing has been PPDS with the activation of this module that can then run embedded into S4. Also in this case, there were some activities to perform yesterday. We said that the initial part you see here as installation and configuration of live cache has been already executed in advance from us. So you have seen that in the pre-document, and then the basic configuration and the master data transfer was required in order to activate that. The scope was not to go too much in details into the topic, but just to show you how you can potentially activate additional functionalities as part of the conversion to S4HANA project. So we hope you have been able to execute all the activities and to see the result at the end with the replication of master data related to materials and work center using the integration model for PPDS, and that is the beginning of the usage then of PPDS in S4HANA. Third activity has been the convert architecture. Yesterday, as we said, we suggested to do this activity as the last one, the third one, just from a timing perspective, because it's the one taking majority of the time just on the execution, on the installation and automation part. And basically the idea was to start from this situation you should all have after the conversion to S4, where we have a Windows box on one side and Diana running on SUSE Linux in another server, and basically migrate the application server to another SUSE Linux server or environment, so that we have an homogeneous architecture all running on Linux. We have seen some questions on that regarding the today's work package, and I see the same question in the chat. So the today's activities can be executed also in a Windows box without doing the conversion to Linux. The main problem is that whatever you execute today has been, first of all, documented on the Linux box, so there may be small changes or slightly more changes, nothing bigger since it is done on the application level. And the other thing is that you will have then to readjust what you will do today if you plan to do the conversion to a Linux box today. So in case you plan to do that today, together with the conversion, make sure you do that after the conversion to Linux. Otherwise, the connection parameter, RFC connection, and so on will point to a different box, to a different server, and that will then change the parameters when you do the conversion. So up to you to decide. Just make sure you know that together in the activities today, you will also set up a connection. Now we are already at the topic for today. Let's enter the topic from an architecture perspective. First of all, as you can see here, the idea of today is to activate the Fiori user interface on top of S4HANA. And this means basically that in general, our S4HANA system as a primary user interface, as the user interface that SAP selects every time we have to create something new or to provide functionalities on top of S4 Fiori. And that particular user interface requires a specific architecture that is composed by a component called SAP Fiori Front-End Server. That's where the services that are exposed and consumed by the Fiori applications will be located. So every time that an application asks for data or sends data, the Fiori front-end server will then act and will then be called into the application directly. The other thing that is located in this server is the Fiori application. So in this case, all Fiori applications are located there, and the user will be basically download those Fiori applications and use them in the software. We have different types of applications. So we have transactional type of application that execute transactions. We have an analytical type, and we have also a fact sheet that allows us to see objects and to use those objects into the specific context with surrounding activities as well. And we will see example of all these Fiori applications today. Here is our system landscape. We will see in a second what are the recommendations that we normally give you in terms of landscape. And in general, you will see in a second the two options. But for our program and for what we will do today, we have selected the separate and standalone front-end server. So you will have an additional server that is the same you used on Monday. To do the custom code analysis, and this will be the front-end server that you will set up with the OData services and with the Fiori application. Okay, that said, the next topic is going to be the landscape recommendation, which is the part where you will see why we have selected that specific architecture for you. And for that, I will hand over to Marcus that will guide you through the system landscape recommendation and through the next chapter. Marcus, over to you.
Thank you, Alessandro. Well, good morning, everyone. This is Marcus speaking. And we'll take a look at the system landscape recommendations. So there are basically two approaches. The first one is the central hub deployment, so having a front-end server that actually is able to serve, in theory, more than one component. So if we have multiple components, this front-end server can actually serve all of them. And the second option that we have is the embedded deployment, so where the gateway component and the Fiori libraries actually sit in the same box as your application layer, and this is the what we call embedded deployment. So there are pros and cons for both options. One is obviously you need a server less in the embedded deployment. Makes the infrastructure probably a bit easier, but on the downside, you will have to patch the system maybe more frequently than if you do a central hub deployment. Okay, so I see the question regarding, yeah, we'll come to that in a minute when we go through. So If we deploy the front-end server as a central hub, as said, this is the scenario that we will also be using in our program, where we have the gateway component and the apps library on a separate server. We are not using a web dispatcher in our case, so you will access that front-end server directly. And on the back-end side, you could have one or multiple ERPs, S4HANA systems, and so on, that would access or would get access through that central front-end server. Now this, as said, patching can be a reason to separate it, and so far this has been the recommendation to deploy front-end servers as standalone, and this is somehow adjusted a bit over, or has been, or we needed to adjust that over the last few months. So the reason behind it is that if we have ERP component or system components, so the green ones that are not on the same level, this can cause issues on the UI versions on the front end. So this has kind of been corrected, that we have a tendency, especially if we have large regional systems or things like that that we need to connect to, that we recommend using the embedded deployment in order to avoid any issues or incompatibilities between different versions of UI libraries. Okay, so the embedded deployment, as you see here, the example with 3 different systems, an ERP, CRM, an SRM, all this is are some components from the past, but the embedded deployment, as we use it for other initiatives, for our demo systems we ship, for example, is very straightforward, and is very straightforward, and then this can also be achieved very easily, and is a very viable solution also if we want to run a Fiori Launchpad. Okay, now let's look at the gateway configuration. I will come to the questions in a minute. So first of all, the communication between the front-end component and the back-end system. Now, as you can see to the right, again here, not only for the analytics world, but also for Fiori, there is a huge reuse of the CDS views in that case, and then using the business objects processing framework if something needs to be updated in the system. So those CDS views, there are a central piece of any S4HANA architecture. Again, on the browser that accesses the front-end server using HTTPS. As you all know here, we recommend the usage of Chrome because that has the fastest engine in order to work on JavaScript. And then all the processing and the communication that takes place to the backend system to grab the data using CDS views or to update any records using then the business objects processing framework. So this is typically then the mechanism that is triggered if we need to generate so we all always hear that Fiori configuration is painful and generates a lot of work in the project. This is to some extent maybe true, but there are a lot of tools that can be used in order to speed up that configuration. And I'm sure you're all familiar with ABAP task lists. So transaction STC01. And if you look at these task lists that we have here, they basically help you, for those that do not know task lists, you can think of task lists like wizards that help you initiate or finish a configuration. And as you can see here, there are some major task lists that we need in order to get the gateway configured. So first of all, there is that basic gateway configuration on top that you would run on the front-end server. Then we have the initial launchpad setup, and as you can see with the arrows to the left, some of the former task lists named that are here are now included in others. So we try to indicate that what is included in which task list. And these task lists, they allow you to basically fill in a few parameters, like an RFC destination, like a service whatsoever, and then let the system do the work, and within minutes you will have your environment configured. So this is the basic configuration that you will be going through. We have put together an activity guide regarding the configuration of the gateway component. And as said, it is really essential that you use the task list in order to make that configuration very easy. Now, once we have the communication set up, the Fiori selection. And I'm sure you all know the Fiori apps library. You have been there, you have searched for Fioris, you have seen the number of Fioris depending on the release or the version you're implementing. This changes. And the most important in Fiori apps library is whatever you select. So you just click on a few Fioris. You will then see to the bottom left a function that is called aggregate. And this aggregate function will go across all the Fioris that you have selected, bring all the three sections you see to the right, so the notes for all of them, the installation requirements and the configuration requirements, will regroup that for all the Fioris that you have selected. So this is the first nice benefit of the aggregate function. The second thing is when you open the configuration and installation tab, you will then find a little further down when you look at the configuration 2 points. One is the ICF nodes and the other one is OData services. Here, across all the Fioris you have selected, the system will actually provide a list of all the all the OData services and all the ICF nodes you need to activate in the system. And with the buttons to the right, so the user interface might change a little bit from time to time when they update the apps library, but there is always that button or a similar one where you can download now the sum of all these nodes that you need to activate. And once you have that, there is other options where you can influence with the button to the upper right here, where you can influence the display and get, for example, very easily the front-end roles that are or that specific Fiori. So if you need to install or configure a specific Fiori, you will very easily be able to identify in which role that Fiori is included. So now what is the link to the rest? So you go into the Fiori apps library, you use that aggregate function. This is the most important. And then you will go back to the task lists, because we also have task lists that help you run that Fiori configuration. And as you can see here, there are task lists to do the initial setup, there are task lists to configure search, and there are two task lists that you might wonder here. One is the activate OData services and the other one for ICF nodes. Sounds familiar. So looking at those two, what you have downloaded from the Fiori apps library actually goes as input parameter into one of these task lists. So go into Fiori apps library, select what you need, download those ICF and OData service CSV files, and then take those files as input to those task lists here, and you have your Fiori applications configured in no time. So the system does it all automatically. You just need to know where to grab the information and where to add that one. If you do an embedded deployment, so the first page that we have shown are the task lists that are for the hub deployment. Those are the ones that you will be using today. But for completeness, we have also included the task lists for the embedded deployment. They're slightly different, but they have the same functionality. So again, basic configuration, and then you activate the Fioris and the services you need. So it's all in here. Depending on the deployment you're running, you can choose the different task lists and execute. Okay, so that one is not a very sharp picture, but there's always the question about the relationship between roles and the content that we see. So first of all, even if we add Fioris now to the system, we have to be aware that from a authorization and rights perspective, you will have to rework your existing roles in the backend. So this is the first thing we have to recognize. Now, but that's on the authorization side. Now, the tools that are used in either hub or embedded deployments are exactly the same. So the well-known TFCG transaction in order to define or extend roles. So from that perspective, you're all fine. You know how to use these tools. What defines or what is different, in addition to what you already know, is how you assign roles or additional roles to the user. So a user, if you edit the user in SU01, for example, and in order to see content in the Fiori Launchpad, you would assign business roles, one or multiple ones, to that specific user. And the business role defines the content this user sees in the Fiori Launchpad. Now, a business role can contain one or multiple catalogs. And the catalog is, as it says, it's a catalog, so all possible items that you can use are in that catalog. And a catalog is structured in a way that we have multiple business groups. Those are the subgroups that you will see, or the groups that are shown on top of the Fiori Launchpad when you log on using the Fiori Launchpad. So a catalog can have one or multiple groups, and those are linked through the business role to the user. and depending on the rights you will assign to the user, he can then choose, he will get a certain set of tiles that he sees right away, and if he is allowed to, he will be able to add additional ones, choosing from the catalog that was assigned to him through the role. So this is the way that extended role configuration works and influences what the user sees. So again, we have new roles, so-called business roles, that define the Fiori Launchpad content, and by implementing Fiori or deploying Fiori front-end interfaces, we also need to readjust the authorization objects that are linked to the backend. Good. So this should be fairly straightforward. We have prepared exercises around that, so you'll be configuring that and using it extensively. Now we have also very often the question, well, Fiori is great, we want to mobilize some processes and want to give these processes or some of them to our sales force or have them run on tablets and so on, which is actually a great use case for Fiori, and very often also one of the drivers why customers would deploy Fioris in their landscape. There are two things. The first of all, for all Android or iOS devices, there is the mobile client, which is a container app, so to say, that you can deploy on these devices. The advantage of that container is that you can access device capabilities, be it the microphone, be it the camera on that specific device, which would not be possible in a pure HTML or browser-based approach. So you can install that mobile client on those devices. In our case, we have set up a reverse proxy. So from the public internet, you will access your systems through that reverse proxy. We have also included a sample configuration in the document that you will see at the end. And in order for you to exercise that, we have created a specific URL per landscape. So you can access your front-end server that you will be configuring and play around with the mobile clients. So to really make it an end-to-end experience in this work package. The URLs, they're all in the documentation, so it should be very easy to follow. Okay, so this is already the closure and call to action. So what we need to do is we will be working on the front-end server. They are actually coming up as we speak. Just need another 2-3 minutes until they're all ready to go. That's where you will be working on the gateway configuration and the Fiori configuration. And this front-end server obviously has to talk to the application server, which is for most groups on Linux. You just have to make sure that within the teams you organize if you want to talk to your Windows machine or if you talk to the new Linux-based application server. This actually brings me back to the question, if in that case there was a question regarding multiple dialog instances, yes, then you have to put a load balancer in between, or if you want to go to one specific application server, then you will configure that. And otherwise you will go through a load balancer, be it web dispatcher, in order to distribute the load across these application server instances. Good, so those are the systems you will be working on, and I said the material is as usual published in Jam. You have 2 days basically to run through that configuration or to catch up with some of the previous work packages. So this should be, or this will allow you to work at your own pace. So I think there is no hurry. You really got 2 full days to get that configuration done and get the Furies working on your environment. Having said that, we're already at the Q&A. So if you have any questions, as usual by chat or using the chat window, or you can unmute your phone and hitting *6 to ask the question. Let me just quickly go through the questions here. Yes. So in S4, this is an issue, and Alessandro has already answered the question. Yes. Yeah, talking about Fiori performance. There are a few rules to observe when you run Fioris. First of all, the design of the roles has to be kept lean. So if the larger you build roles, the more time it will need to load. So keep the roles lean. This would be one recommendation. We already talked about Chrome as the front end or the browser engine to use. There is one thing that we usually forget in a Windows or SAP GUI for Windows environment are the table controls. If you look at, for example, VA01, so the order entry transaction, and the lower part of the screen, there is that a typical table control, and in SAP GUI for Windows we never feel the difference. And
sorry, this is the notes specifically around using the micro hub. So the recommendation is that the majority of the processing for Fiori is now, it's kind of like it emulates a embedded gateway, but you still keep your hub gateway system, but it's only the initial call is made to the front end, and then all of the processing is done on the back end. So it's a new recommendation that's just come out in this note, but I'm not sure if it's something that we should be looking to implement for all our customers, or if it's just a specific use case.
Well, the reason why we had to adjust that recommendation is actually that one of our larger customers has wanted to deploy front-end servers per region, which is a good idea. But in that region, they have 3 or 4 S4HANA systems, and if you can imagine, if it's a larger customer, they cannot keep up or patch or upgrade at the same time all these 4 regional systems, and that's the reason why we actually found the issue with the incompatibilities in S4, and that's why we have this adjusted recommendation using or more using the embedded approach than we had before.
Ah, right, okay. So if it's just a standard landscape with a front end and a back end S4 system, then leave it as it is.
Yes,
yeah,
all good.
Okay.
Okay, so what else? Fiori offline capabilities. Yes and no. You have some mechanisms if you use the mobile client on those devices, iOS or Android. Other than that, there is not too much offline. other points? Ah, yeah, exactly. I got distracted. Yes. So the table controls, right? In VA01 or some other transactions, they tend to have sometimes up to 120 columns that are pulled in SAP GUI for Windows, and this never hurts in SAP GUI for Windows, so you do not even think about it. But in Fiori or in the web GUI, those table controls, if you don't limit the number of columns that you really need, they can really hurt performance. So this is something that where you have to be careful that you limit the number of columns that you pull in web GUI. So just do a display variant for that, and then you're fine. Okay. Well, there is, in theory, there is only the creation of house banks that definitely needs Fiori, but there is also a workaround for that is known in the community. So in theory, you don't need. And if we look at the typical system conversion, you would probably move the customer to S4HANA, continue to work on SAP GUI, and then in order to limit the risk that you have and retraining of the users and so on. And then in a second project, you will then deploy Fiori in the customer landscape. If you do a conversion that way, we can then, since the conversion itself is a big bang, so everyone that is in the system at the same time, in deployment of Fioris, we can then again approach either by role or by geography or by plant or whatever is most appropriate for that customer. Okay, so that's an interesting question. If you have users on the inside and on the outside, and how to set that up on a domain name services level. The idea or the ideal is actually to have one single point of access. So even if the internals, if their requests go through a reverse proxy that you have in the landscape, this is not very difficult, I would say. Then you would have one single configuration, and there are URLs that are generated that need to be properly resolved. So this is something that needs to be looked at. But in most cases, we would have a reverse proxy or a web dispatcher, and then route every request through that. Okay, so the infrastructure, your servers, they're coming up. Just give me a few more minutes. The instances are here. I will or the virtual machines are up and running. And I will start the instances anytime. So just give me a minute that I can run these scripts, and they will be available for you. Okay, so I think we have answered most of the questions. Any other points you have? Doesn't look like. Okay. So in that case, thank you very much from all of us. continue the great work on the work packages. The documentation is already in Jam, and if there are any issues, please post them there. We try to help and get you through the program. Having said that, thank you very much and have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
The leader has dropped from the call, and if the leader doesn't dial back in and rejoin, the conference will be terminated. 30 minutes.